Hey guys, Eileen here from Homegrown Happiness. In today's video I'm going to show you how I make my no-dig garden beds. So before I start, I just wanted to give a little bit of an explanation on why I choose no-dig gardening and a little bit about it. So the first thing to understand about no-dig gardening is that a no-dig gardener sees their soil as being alive. So a lot of gardeners will choose to feed their plants to make them grow and give them fertilizers to make their plants grow, while a no-dig gardener would feed their soil because by feeding their soil, that soil then in turn feeds their plants. So by understanding that your soil is alive and underneath there are millions and billions of microorganisms of bacteria and fungi and worms that are all creating this little ecosystem down there and working in these symbiotic relationships, all working together to create this thriving environment. By understanding that, you're less likely to want to dig into that and disturb it and ruin it. So all these organisms in the soil are all doing their part. They're helping break things down, they're converting nitrogen gases into nitrogen molecules that plants can take up. They're helping plants take up nutrients faster. They've all got their parts. There are also organisms that like to live at the top layer of the garden, so where the organic matter is, and then there are organisms that live much deeper down. And when you're digging and you're flipping, you're kind of bringing the organisms from down the bottom up to the top and vice versa, and it's just all kind of messed up down there, and then they've got to find their way and rebuild things, and it's kind of going backwards. So with no-dig gardening, you, instead of digging the soil up and ruining these structures down there, you're actually building the no-dig bed on top of the soil, so that way you're not ruining any structures, and eventually these top layers will break down and merge and become one with the bottom soil layer that you've built on top. And then the other side of no-dig gardening is that it's a lot easier than digging. There's no real manual labour involved because you're not having to dig anything up or flip the soil. It's also really cheap to make because a lot of the layers that you use are really easily found and they're usually free. I'm making two different no-dig gardens in this video, and for the first one I'm going to be using some compost. I've got some pea straw. Though you don't have to buy pea straw, you can totally use whatever mulch you've got around, but in this case I've got pea straw. I've got some cardboard. I also have some grass clippings and shredded leaves, some aged horse manure, some seaweed, and some worm castings. So the section that I'm choosing to build these no-dig garden beds is my front garden. This bit of my garden actually gets 2 to 3 hours of sun in winter, which is a lot more than my top garden gets. So I'm glad to finally be using it. It's also getting me closer to my goal of having only an edible garden, so no more lawn. Hashtag grow food, not lawns. So to start off, I'm going to be just layering down newspaper. So the newspaper will just block out the sunlight and then stop any weeds from growing through. Because this area is just pretty much grass, there are no really invasive weeds. I'm not going too thick on the newspaper. It's about 1/2 centimetre to 1 centimetre thick in certain places. If there were lots more harder to kill weeds, more invasive weeds, I would go much thicker with the newspaper. Once that's layered down, I just wet it. This just aids with the decomposition. It'll just help it all break down a lot faster. Then I add on a layer of compost and a layer of aged horse manure. And you can see all the worms in there. Then after that I'm going to add on some seaweed and just roughly chop that. So after this layer of compost and the horse manure, which is going to be adding nitrogen, I want to add in a layer of carbon. So these shredded leaves will add the carbon. There's also some grass clippings in there, which is nitrogen again, but it's mainly leaves. So just this middle layer of carbon. Just layer what you want when you want, but I like to kind of alternate it between greens and browns, carbons and nitrogen. And some worm castings. Then I'm going to top it with another layer of compost and then water that in really well. At this point it's about 10 centimeters high. Again, if I had more invasive weeds, I would make the entire bed higher. Then my last layer is mulch, and in this case I'm using pea straw, but you can use shredded leaves, you could use any spent plants that you've got that you can just chop up and let those become mulch, whatever you've got. And I'm going to add in 3 stones in the middle because it's quite a large bed and I don't want to be walking in and compressing the soil anywhere. So these 3 stones will be my stepping stones to be able to reach the bed. And that's the finished bed. And it's totally fine to plant in there right now. In fact, I'm going to be planting out some brassicas, got some cabbage seedlings and some spinach and some tatsoi. So initially I was going to stop at just that bed because I'd actually run out of cardboard, but then I got some more and then I thought, why not one more bed? I have a little bit of garlic left that I want to plant out. Not until next month in June. I'm going to plant this lot out on the traditional shortest day of the year. So this little bed that I'm making for that, it's not going to be planted in straight away, so I'm going to be actually using some compost that is not broken down much at all. You can see big chunks of food in there, but it's also full of worms, so it will break down quickly, but it can do it in the bed. So I'm just layering down cardboard, then topping it with that compost. And then I'm going to add on some leaves. Top it with another layer of compost. I'm also going to put on some comfrey. I've always lots of comfrey growing in the garden. It's really good because it's got a really long tap root, so it gets the nutrients from right down into the soil and brings them up in their leaves. So when those leaves break down, it all gets put back into the soil. And then I'm going to use leaves as the final mulch layer on this bed. If I was planting in this bed straight away, I would shred these leaves just because they've got a tendency to kind of mat together when they're whole like that, and then it's harder for water to get in. But because I'm not planting in it straight away, I'm just going to use this as a mulch matting until I'm ready to plant in it in June. So I made this bed about 10 days ago, and already there is a lot of growth in these brassicas. This is especially cool considering that they still just get 2 to 3 hours of sun, so that's not ideal for brassicas. They would love a lot more, but they're obviously really happy in this little bed, which is really cool to see. This is how I create all the beds on my property. It's a tried and true method now. I have had only good results with this, and it is so easy. So if you haven't tried a no-dig garden bed before, I really recommend you do. Thanks for watching. See you next time.